dams go down to swelter in Washington, D.C., I wanted to say a few things about the nature of politics and the idiocy it represents. God knows I have plenty to work with. Still do. Now, one thing we know for sure about Representative Poliquin, he will not be invited to join the obscure caucus that his predecessor ornamented. You remember was one of the nonpartisan websites had identified the members of what they call a bipartisan caucus of individuals who rested comfortably in Washington, D.C., caused no disturbances, apart from occasional snore emitting from their offices. Well, we know that Bruce Poliquin is not going to be that. We already know, for example, that he has broken all records for raising funds, preparing for a second term, but of course he must. You don't really get that effective in 2 years among 435 representatives. But he's broken all records. He's amassed the money for winning again, which he must do on our behalf. Now, here's the thing to bear in mind. This is the Maine Taxpayers United. It is, in fact, a non-partisan group. Well, that is odd, because I ran as Republican, didn't I? And Paul LePage is the Republican governor, and Bruce Poliquin is the Republican representative, and we introduced by Beth O'Connor, emphatically Republican representative. Now, but pay attention here. Maine Taxpayers United. We intend to represent all taxpayers, whether they are Republicans or Democrats. That is what makes us non-partisan, which in fact we are. So it's not our purpose to act as an adjunct of the Republican Party. The Republican Party, as long as it alludes to its candidates like Paul LePage, will certainly have our allegiance. Unless in a very unlikely case, the Democrats come up with somebody with more dedication. How likely is that, to be sure? So now, Bruce, I would say, is showing initial energy to disturb some people, but it is not both the immediate ending of Obamacare. And just 3 Republicans will that line. And that makes us cautious, because I say again, we're waiting and watching our incumbent politicians. And ultimately, the question of taxes, we are unforgiving. Keep that in mind, Bruce. All right? Now step up here and best space you can on that.
Thank you, John, very, very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Governor, for your remarks on behalf of everybody who wants a job, who wants prosperity and more freedom here in the state of Maine. Can you all remember a few years ago, looking at our state's debt clock unwind? Everybody remember that? You know, if you go to, I don't know what the website is, John, but it's a website that calculates state and federal debt. But in any event, this was pointed out to me that a few years ago it was actually unwinding. And the reason it was unwinding were a couple of things. First of all, is that you folks worked really hard to get people like Paul LePage in office. And then, frankly, my ability to participate along with his agenda as state treasurer. But what happened is very simple, is that folks that have business backgrounds, like many of us do in this room, realize that spending, overspending, and debt causes taxes to go up, and that kills jobs. So we have to unwind that. And one of the things that we tackled right off the bat, that John mentioned, was our unfunded pension liability for our teachers and state workers. We owed about $4.3 billion more in benefits for our state employees and our teachers than we had money to pay for those benefits. So we reformed it. We lopped off $1.7 billion from the backs of our taxpayers. That allowed the governor in the legislature to reduce spending by about $200 to $300 million per year, and then they passed the largest income tax cut in state history, and the debt clock was unwinding. Now that was a while ago. Unfortunately, it's going the other way now, I think, John, if I'm not mistaken. But the question becomes, Can you do this in Washington? Absolutely you can. The first step is you must get people who understand the problem and who are committed to fixing it. Once you do that, you can start fixing the problem. What I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about what we're doing down there to, in fact, solve the problem as we start to do here in Maine. First of all, I'm glad everybody's sitting down, most people are sitting down, I know you're not Jay. But I'm going to tell you some stuff that's really hard to swallow. The fiscal mess in Washington is a lot bigger than any of us probably can even dream. It's bigger than I ever realized. It is huge, it's monstrous. Can we fix it? Yes. This is going to be a very heavy lift, and it's going to be slow, and it's going to be tough. For example, 2/3 of the spending in Washington is on autopilot. It's in 3 programs: Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. It is growing like this, and it's in law, which makes it even more difficult to fix. Now, we cannot start unwinding our federal debt clock unless we address those issues. Now, the good news is that we're all living longer. When I was a kid growing up in Waterville, we had someone in our neighborhood that maybe reached 9 years old. That was a real big deal. Remember those days? Now we have folks regularly living until they're 90, 95, and oftentimes they reach 100. So that's the good news. The bad news is it's really expensive. Because we have these folks who their entire lives have paid into Social Security and Medicare. They have been promised these benefits, they have put money into these benefits, and they must receive them. But it's expensive. So we have also the baby boomers that are retiring. So it's like this pig going through a python. And it's very expensive to pay for this. But that is 2/3 of our spending. So the question is, how can we deal with this to make sure we can start unwinding our debt cost? Well, first of all, we have to, as a government, as a society, make sure that the benefits for our seniors or those that are close to being seniors and retirees cannot change. They paid in, they promised these, they've got to get these, and I will defend that because the last breath in my body. However, for those that are younger, like my son Sam, that many of you have met, he's 24, we're going to have a very honest and serious discussion with these folks. And say, if you want Medicare and Social Security, when you retire, you need to make some adjustments. One of the adjustments that we just made last week, if you are, starting in a few years in 2018, if you as a couple are earning $267,000 a year or more, we're going to ask you to pay a little bit more for your Medicare monthly premiums. We think that's fair. If you're making over $267,000 a year as a couple. Now, that will have an enormous impact on this plan going forward. It strengthens it, and it also makes sure that it's there for folks when they get to be that age. The House, 3 weeks ago, passed its budget. It balances. It balances without raising taxes. It saves $5.5 trillion over the next decade. We are on the right path, but let me tell you, this is going to be tough, it's going to be slow. The Senate, they have passed their budget, so now we're in conference to try to work out the differences between the two of them. But there are 2 things in our balanced budget that I really like. Number 1, it requires a vote on the floor by the House of Representatives on an amendment to our Constitution, our 28th Amendment, to balance the federal budget. I don't need to see any more in Augusta or in Washington to know that the folks that represent us at all levels of government, they just don't have the wherewithal, the courage in many cases, to make sure we balance our books every year. Now, Maine does because we have a law. The federal government can just keep printing money, and they do. They spend whatever they want to spend, Once they run out of tax revenues, then they just borrow or print money to make up the difference. So this is a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. It's going to be a heavy lift. I am so excited about this. On the second day in representing you in Washington, I co-sponsored the bill to require this, and I talked about it on the floor. The second thing that's in this budget, embedded in the language, is a process to repeal Obamacare. Now, as Joe mentioned, I was one of 3 Republicans who voted about 2 months ago not to repeal this on its own. And I've had a discussion with many of you about this. Here's why. I am 61 years old. I've had a career, I've been blessed with a career, and I came out of the business community to help my state and my district and my country. I am not going down to Washington to grandstand. We have voted already down there 55 times, 65 times, to repeal Obamacare, and what has changed? 0. So I made it very clear to the leadership down there. I will vote to repeal this. You give me a replacement. Not a government replacement. You give me a free market off-ramp to get out of this mess. I'm down here to fix problems, not to grandstand. And I've been barking in people's ears on your behalf. You have no idea. And other people have also. So the good news about this budget, it is embedded in the budget that there is a process to repeal Obamacare. In the meantime, we've been picking it apart, piece by piece. We repealed the 30-hour work week. We did that on the second week. I was thrilled to be part of that. I co-sponsored a bill to repeal the individual mandate and also the medical device tax. So we are getting there, but this is going to be a tough road to hoe. There's also something that should be very important to everybody in this room, is that there is a Supreme Court case that is being heard right now. The decision is due to come up in May or June, and it may very well rule the federal exchanges for Obamacare unlawful. If that's the case, we darn well better be ready for a free market off-ramp. So that's the position when it comes to that, and we'll see where that goes. Another thing that's included in the budget, and I keep mentioning included in the budget, here's why this is so important. The President and Harry Reid cannot stop this budget. They cannot stop it. The House has 435 members. We have so many rules there, we get stuff done in 3, 4, 5 hours. We send it over to the Senate. My goodness gracious. There are only 100 of them, but the rules are different. They take forever, if at all. But when it comes to a budget, it's the one part of our federal government where you do not need 60 votes to get it done. What Harry Reid does is he has we have 54 votes in the Senate. So we have the majority, but they filibuster. So all the Democrats hang together, and they filibuster, so they stop anything from going forward. And you need 60 votes, not 54. You need 60 to break the filibuster and then move forward and vote on these pieces of legislation, except a budget. You only need 51 votes. Harry Reid cannot stop this. The President cannot stop this. So I am thrilled about this. And some of the other pieces that are in this budget are welfare reforms. Do you know that your tax dollars are being spent on TV, radio, and newspaper ads encouraging young folks to sign up for food stamps? We've removed that. And instead of saying, let's do some common sense here. Let's have some common sense. Let's use that money instead for job training, but not to advertise the food stamp enrollment. Second of all, we are making sure that these waivers to remove states from the ability to not require people to work to receive welfare, as the governor mentioned, we've taken those waivers out, such that if you're receiving public assistance, then you have to commit to community service, or you have to work, or you have to improve your education. So we're also making sure that we have block grants to the states, slugs of money for Medicaid. Don't let Washington dictate what your health care welfare program should be, but instead, let's give the states a slug of money. Let's let Governor LePage in the legislature, closer to the people, decide how those programs should be administered. So there are a bunch of welfare reforms in the budget that I'm very pleased about. Last week, I was almost sprinting, John, to the little place where you put your ID in to vote to repeal the death tax. The governor mentioned that here at the state level. It's in his budget. We have been barking in the ears, I have been on your behalf along with others, including Mr. Ryan, who's now runs Ways and Means, Paul Ryan. We need a stand-up vote on repealing the death tax. We did that in the House in a bipartisan measure, and now it's over in the Senate. We hope that they do their work. But when you have small businesses all around the district, when you have family farms and dairy farms throughout the Scottsboro and Somerset County and Franklin County, and potato growers and broccoli growers in Aroostook County, and all of a sudden they work their whole lives to grow their family farm or their business. They now move on to another place, and their kids get a knock on the door from the Internal Revenue Service and say, you know, you owe us a slug of money. And the question becomes, at the kitchen table, what equipment do we have to sell? What land do we have to sell? How many employees do we need to lay off? That is absolutely wrong. So we repealed it in the House, and it took us about an hour. It's now in the hands of the Senate. Let's put pressure on the Senate to make sure they repeal it also, and then it goes to the President's desk. Another thing that we've been working on down there, you love this one. Do you know there are thousands of employees at the Internal Revenue Service that have not paid their taxes? When I found this out, my head almost exploded. So I co-sponsored a bill that makes it very simple. The Internal Revenue Service can't hire anybody until the people that are there now pay out. That is fair. Now, I know some of you folks like to watch movies before you go to bed. So I'm going to give you an opportunity, Gary, to do that. If you go to our website, which is not the campaign website, but our official government website, it's poliquin.house.gov. What our staff has done is carved out the questioning that I've had as a member of the House Financial Services Committee and some of the biggest bureaucrats in Washington. Let me give you a couple of stories. First of all, there are 57 people on this committee that I sit on, and it deals with money flows throughout our state, throughout our economy, throughout our nation. Home mortgages, auto loans, small business loans. So when you folks need to add on to your kitchen or buy a new car, you're treated fairly. You're not being ripped off. Well, we have the biggest regulators, bureaucrats in Washington, appear before our committee. And all the senior members sit up back. And it's tiered. And they get down to the freshmen, and I'm one of 3 on that committee, 57 people, 1 of 3. We sit in the front row. Some people sit on the right, some people sit on the left. I sit right in the middle, right opposite whoever's going to be testifying from us. I'm about 10 foot away, and I'm voting for Bear. Give you a couple of examples. There is an organization called the FDIC, and they insure bank deposits. They're also one of the regulators of all of our banks, most of our banks throughout America, community banks in Maine and throughout the country. Do you know that they put together, I could not believe this, a list that we have in email form, a list of what they view to be, and the administration views to be, undesirable businesses. Firearms dealers, businesses that sell tobacco, businesses that sell fireworks and others. And they have gone to their examiners and asked them to put pressure on the banks in conjunction with the Justice Department to shut down credit to businesses they deem to be undesirable. Can you imagine that in this country? Well, if you go to poliquin.house.gov, you'll see my questioning of the gentleman, Mr. Bloomberg, who runs the FDIC. Remember when we started to clean up the mess at the Maine State Housing Authority? What was the first point, the first step of the process? Expose it. Show the people of Maine that they were spending about $300,000 for one-bedroom apartments, while we had 6,000 families on a waiting list trying to get out of the cold, and we fixed it. There's another organization called the CFPB that Elizabeth Warren is her favorite, and it is supposed to be a body that regulates the financial business. And now they're putting they're putting more and more regulations, so it's making it more and more tough on our consumers. Well, when I found out that they had a plan to spend $216 million to renovate an office building that they didn't own, but was owned by a president's fundraiser. $216 million that had a 2-story waterfall in the building and a playground on the roof. I mean, I could not believe it. I have it right in front of me. So that's also there if you want to have some good bedtime viewing. But we made it very clear that this is unacceptable. And we're putting all kinds of pressure on people down there to make sure they spend your money wisely. I have absolutely zero tolerance for people wasting money. Now, what is coming up in the next 2 weeks does not deal directly with taxes. We have a very serious situation in the Middle East. Very. And part of dealing with that issue is making sure that Iran does not acquire nuclear weapons. The Senate, in the Foreign Relations Committee, I think it's National Security, one of the committees dealing with these issues, voted 19-0 to take it out of committee. It's now going to the floor of the Senate to make sure that Congress, Senate, and the House has a say in whatever President and Mr. Kerry negotiate with the Iranians when it comes to the nuclear program. It is going to come to the House floor, I believe, in the next 2 weeks. I will tell you, we are going to hang tough, we're going to stand up, and we're going to be very clear. There is no way on our watch, when we have a say, that Iran will have a nuclear weapon, and we're going to make sure we vote with, presumably the Senate, to make sure we have a say. Anything that's negotiated with Iran, we have a way to vote it up or down. I'm going to send the president, and we'll see what he does. But this is very, very serious stuff. I am very grateful for the opportunity to represent you. I come back every weekend. I am working my tail off to make sure we are holding people accountable down there. And I will tell you this, is that even with all these problems, the governor talks about, what I've spoken about, what I'm sure Larry will speak about, this is still America. This is still the greatest country on God's green earth. We have the most freedoms, we have the most opportunity, we have the biggest economy. But we need to make sure that we continue to stay engaged and stay involved. The reason I am standing here is because of your work. I get it. The reason why the governor was reelected was because of your work. We have not had this seat in the House of Representatives for 20 years. I am so committed to keeping this seat. You have no idea, and John mentioned that we raised a boatload of money to make sure we will have the ability to get our message out. I don't care who we run against. I don't care if it's Emily Candy. I hope it is. We know who she is. I mean, it is very well known. She is an extreme, radical, liberal that has been part of the mess we have in this state. Sending her down to Washington would be a mess and make it worse, and that's why she didn't win last time, and that's why we're going to win again in about 21 months. But I want everybody, when you read today, to think about a country where you can trust the people you send to Washington or Augusta, like Representative Lockman, like Beth O'Connor and others. Trust them to do what is right, to lower taxes, to lower energy costs, to reduce regulations, to deal with this health care problem, and then when we do that, we'll have a growing economy and more opportunities for our kids. And the next 4 years can be a great time for this country. Stay involved. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Congressman Poliquin. Our second district is well represented, and we thank you for that, and hope that it's a long, long run. If we could only get you that kind of help from the first district. Mr. Turk, Board of Director Member Mark Turk, your word for us.
Thank you all for being here, and I am very honored to introduce our next speaker. I won't go into a long rambling thing, but I will just say he is going to be addressing something that is extremely important, that has very deep roots here in Maine, and it actually does impact everybody in Maine, believe it or not. The roots are kind of far stretching, but he represents House District 137. He drove about 130 miles to get here, so I very much appreciate him making the effort to come down here. He is serving in his second term, and he is the ranking Republican member of the Labor and Commerce Committee. And I hope you will all help me welcome State Representative Larry Lockman.
Thank you, Mark. And good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be here today to join with like-minded, liberty-loving Mainers. I want to begin by reminding all of you that Maine people are absolutely fed up with the state we're in after decades of left-wing progressive policymaking in Augusta. And because they're fed up with politics as usual, they elected Paul LePage 4.5 years ago, and they re-elected him last fall. When he first took office in 2011, it was the first time since 1964 that Maine had a Republican governor and Republican majorities in both houses of the legislature. With the able assistance of State Treasurer Bruce Poliquin, Governor LePage went to work to repair the damage done after nearly half a century of one-party control of state government. Two of the absolutely worst pieces of legislation in Maine history were the state income tax in 1969 and union monopoly bargaining for state employees in 1974. The progressives would never have been able to grow state government and build their nanny state nonprofit industrial complex without a punitive state income tax and forced union dues into the treasury of the government employees union. But the progressives knew they couldn't do this in one bite, so they did it incrementally. For example, when it was first enacted in 1969, as Professor Frary made reference to, the top rate of the state income tax was 6% on income over $50,000. That's the equivalent of $320,000 today. By the time Governor LePage took office in 2011, the top rate had been jacked up to 8.5%, and the top bracket had been ratcheted down to kick in at $19,950. That means Maine state government treated people earning less than $20,000 like millionaires in the top bracket. And yet state government was effectively broke, with $750 million in unpaid medical welfare bills owed to Maine hospitals. Likewise, when collective bargaining for state employees was enacted in 1974, the mandatory dues provision in the original bill was struck from the bill by an amendment on the floor of the state Senate. It was nearly 40 years later that Governor John Baldacci negotiated a contract with the union bosses that forced all new hires to pay union dues, whether they liked it or not. 2 years later, Baldacci negotiated another contract that required all non-member state employees to pay. Even employees who had been hired 10 or 20 or 30 years before, when payment of fees was not a condition of employment. And then the final nail in the coffin came in 2007, when Baldacci and the union bosses teamed up to push a bill through the legislature that made state government a collection agent for the unions and generated a $700,000 annual windfall to the union bosses at the MSEA, SEIU. I want to be very clear here that these aren't partisan issues. I'm not just picking on Democrats. Although, as many of you know, I'll be glad to do that when necessary. The point is that the state income tax was passed with Republican majorities in both houses of the Maine legislature in 1969. Monopoly collective bargaining for state employees was sponsored by a Republican state senator in 1974. Frankly, if a legislator opposes tax freedom or workplace freedom, I don't care whether they have an R or a D after their name, they need to be replaced. And let's also be clear that Maine voters gave us a mandate last fall to continue reforming state government. I ran for re-election as a right-to-work candidate, and so did Governor LePage. To put it bluntly, if Maine people wanted to allow the union bosses to continue plundering the paychecks of Maine workers, they would have elected Mike Mishu governor. But they didn't do that, did they? In fact, the voters gave Paul LePage more votes than any governor in Maine's history. Remember, too, that every single Democrat incumbent in the Maine legislature who lost their seat last fall voted against right to work in 2013, every single one of them. When Michigan passed right to work in 2012, the union bosses vowed that they would target for defeat every legislator who voted for that bill. And guess what happened? Last fall, Michigan voters re-elected every single one of those lawmakers, and then some. Next month, the Maine legislature will have another shot at passing right-to-work legislation and sending the bill to Governor LePage for his signature. The governor's left, but at this point I was going to turn to him and ask if we could count on him to sign that when he reached his desk. The public hearing will be on Monday, May the 4th. That is 2 weeks from tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. in the Labor and Commerce Committee. The committee will send the bills on to the full legislature within several weeks after the public hearings. In advance of those hearings, I want to take this opportunity to issue a rebuttal to one of the arguments that the union bosses always raise in these debates. We are going to be told that right to work really means right to work for less. We're going to be told that wages and benefits in right to work states lag behind wages and benefits in compulsory union states. There's only one problem with this claim. It's not true. Workers in right to work states on average have several $1,000s more in disposable income every year than workers in non-right to work states. Adjusted for the cost of living, wages are better in states that protect workplace freedom. So the question is, why do entrepreneurs prefer right to work states? Why are manufacturing jobs moving from compulsory union states to states that protect workers' paychecks from union coercion? One of the reasons is that successful businesses don't want to be handcuffed by absurd and inefficient union work rules that drive up the cost of doing business. Hostess Brands was driven into bankruptcy and destroyed, in large measure because union bosses wouldn't budge on work rules that required cake and bread products to be delivered to the same retail location in 2 separate trucks. You couldn't have Twinkies and Wonder Bread on the same truck. Drivers weren't allowed to unload their own vehicles. or to load their vehicles. And the workers who loaded bread weren't allowed to load cake. 500 jobs were lost in Maine when the company shut down a little more than 2 years ago. This was an iconic American company that survived the Great Depression and World War II, but couldn't survive under the thumb of union bosses' power to dictate insane work rules. It turns out that Hostess Twinkies were easier to digest than union work rules. Sorry about that. In conclusion, it's not too soon to start putting pressure on your state reps and senators. Let them know how important this issue is to you. Not just from the standpoint of personal freedom, but also what a boost it would be to Maine's economy if we became the first state in New England to liberate workers from compulsory unionism. Tell your legislators you will be watching and you expect them to do the right thing and vote for right to work. You can also help by signing the petition that my good friends from New England Citizens for Right to Work are circulating. Zach, are you going to get that circulated around the room? Absolutely. Great. In closing, I want to thank you again for inviting me here today and for all you folks have done and are doing to make Maine a freer and more prosperous state. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing many of you again at the State House 2 weeks from tomorrow, May the 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lockman. Good fight on that. That is going to wind down our program. We have some great organizations, like-minded fellows around the room. If you'd please take time to stop and chat with them. We've got a couple of great raffles going on. The local Representative Beth O'Connor stayed up late cooking. She's got 2 beautiful cakes back there and a box full of Death by Chocolate cupcakes.